Welcome to How to Set Confident Boundaries and 6 Steps, the ultimate course for people pleasers. And this is week 5, and I'm really glad that you have joined me for today. And you know who I am. I'm Julie Hawkins. I'm a certified NLP trainer. I've been a coach for about 20 years and a trainer, and that's what I really do most of my time now is train. And I'm also an author of Say No Without Guilt. So you know me. Okay, I think I mentioned last time that I always review the goals for the workshop, and I invite you to review your goals for this workshop as well, because I think that they may change as every week goes by. And I think one does not change, which is nobody wants to feel like a doormat, right? Nobody likes the way that feels. And so that's really what this workshop is all about, this training is all about, is to help you identify those knee-jerk responses that cause you to say yes when you really want to say no, or at the very least think about it and then replace that knee-jerk response with more empowered responses. So that's this in a nutshell, right? We're going to always be identifying negative behavior patterns, responses that don't serve us, that don't support our values and our goals, and always working on really changing those to be more empowered. All right. And then, of course, in the very end, you get to have these great communication skills to convey your boundaries and anything else you want to convey. So, woohoo, right? Right. So, I'm not going to go through the whole homework, but what I want to say is we've worked on the TAIL, or the tail of the Taylor system, which is becoming aware of your triggers. We are always in awareness mode. We're always playing the awareness game 24/7. And triggers are, we can have triggers for different things. So you're always paying attention to what triggers a negative feeling. That's what you're paying attention to. That's what you're creating awareness around. And of course, the I is to identify the underlying issue and to bring in your intuition in this whole process. And then, of course, the L is all about language. That's really the essence of what we're learning and using in this training, in this workshop, is all about new language skills for you. As people pleasers, it was really a point of we didn't have the skills for language. Plain and simple, okay? And so that's what the empowering action, among others, is in this workshop, is really about discovering your language for setting your boundaries. One other thing that we also talked about, that even though it's not necessarily a step in the Taylor system, it is part of the Taylor system, and that is always, 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 always checking in and discovering what are my expectations about the situation, about myself, about other people. What do I expect? Okay? And if I have expectations of someone else, to begin to ask them, what do you expect from me? What is your role in this situation? It's instead of trying to do a mind read, it's really about having a conversation with somebody. Okay. The other part, and we're always doing this work and discovering new language patterns, is to really check and become aware of the language patterns you use that may not serve you. One thing that people pleasers do often is to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry it's bad weather today." I mean, we have no control over the weather. So checking your language, okay? Just remember to notice those language patterns and think about what you might be able to replace them with. Now, it's okay to feel compassion for somebody and say, I'm sorry. And then to follow it up with what you're sorry for. I'm sorry that you're struggling today. I'm sorry that you may be having a rough day. I'm sorry that things are off for you. Is there anything I can do to support you? That's what follows up. I'm sorry. Okay? All right. Ooh, the juicy part. So last segment, we worked on our values. And as I discussed, our values are really the foundation. They help us discover what is the language that we use to set our boundaries. Okay, they're amazingly kind of accurate, and you don't have to change a lot. Once you identify your values about a certain situation, the one that maybe you feel like you need to set better boundaries in, then you discover through the exercise that we did of identifying what's most important to you about blank, fill in the blank, then you really begin to fill in what are your values about that segment of your life. And we know there's several segments, right? There's 9 segments. And so values, understanding our values are crucial. They are the, not just the foundation, they are the juicy part of this. It is the feel-good part of this, right? So always discovering more about your values and where they plug into those situations where you feel triggered and disempowered. This is really the juicy, big foundational part of boundary setting, okay? And we know that some of our values don't change throughout our lives, and some of them do. As we change jobs, as we grow and evolve personally, we'll discover that certain aspects of our lives require us to reevaluate and prioritize our values in a different way. That's a good thing. That's a really good thing. It shows that you're paying attention to what's going on in your life and that you're growing, okay? So always, always, always identifying your values, creating that list that we did from our last segment, which is just such a, I don't know, juicy is the word of the day for me. Such a feel-good exercise, right? And it's kind of an epiphany. It's like, wow, oh, I kind of knew this, and saying it makes it so firm and real and important. And so I really, really invite you to do a boundary, a values exploration or elicitation, as I call this, as often as, I mean, you don't need to do it like all the time, because once you've elicited your values, you've got them now for a while. But to do them in each of the areas of your life, it can be very eye-opening and just really fulfilling. So, which, hey, don't we all want that? We all want to feel good and fulfilled, and getting a picture of what your values are will do that for you. So one of the pieces of homework last time was to take that list and add to it if you want. If you're anything like me, I bring in information in pieces, okay? So I've done this exercise and I've created this list, and then as I'm doing something else, I'll be like, oh, and wait, then there's this is important to me too. And so you can just go and write it down. So if something occurs to you you know, a couple of days later, a week later, that's all the better. And you can just redo your list and then prioritize it again. And I have found that over years of doing this with my clients and students, that this is really about the top 10 values, and then taking that list of your top 10, prioritizing them 1 through 10, and then really looking at your top 5, maybe enough for a while, okay? Because in essence, what you really want to do is be living, fulfilling, supporting those values, those top 5, could be maybe it's 4 or 6, I'm not married to the number 5, that group of values, and making sure that when you make decisions, that you're making them in accordance with those values. That when you set boundaries, you're doing it based on those top values. That's the whole reason for that exercise, okay? We know, and I like to remind you of this because I want to reinforce how good it feels when you do that, and how kind of crappy it feels when you don't, right? Because when you ignore your values and you let somebody step on your boundaries, then you devalue yourself. When you ignore your values, you begin to resent others, and then you project those feelings onto others, okay? And when you ignore your values, you feel stressed out, overwhelmed, angry, frustrated, all those negative feelings that, remember way back when we were told we could clear? Well, we clear them when we set our boundaries according to our values, right? So that's the vital part of boundary setting. And it really leads us to live that vital, fulfilled, empowered, happy, healthy life. So let's see, setting them, not setting them, supporting our values. There is no choice. We are always going to support our values from now on. Doesn't say we don't fall down every once in a while, and that's okay, because you have permission to make a mistake and go back and tell somebody about it. This is kind of a little misnomer for people pleasers, that if we make a decision and we say something to somebody, whether it be yes, no, or something else, that we can't go back and say, you know what, Joe, I was really thinking about that conversation we had. And as I thought about it, I really got connected to what's important to me about this. And so, can we renegotiate this? Let's look at other ways that we can fulfill it, because this way is not really helpful for me. And so there's your language, right? You can go back and compromise, renegotiate, and really figure out a better way that works for both parties or multiple parties. All right. So just as a reminder, I just love these aspects. You know, we can go back and look at each one of these aspects, and I think that's 8, right? There we go. And do elicit our values in each one of these areas. I think it brings you a lot of clarity, a lot of new goals that you might want to set about in those areas. Things that you may want to accomplish. You might get some ahas, some surprises. Oh, wow, I didn't realize how important that really was for me. And it's just beautiful when you discover that, right? So let's see, Bella's here. We'll see if she wants to jump up and visit us. You want to come up, Bella? So I really support and encourage you to do that when you have time, okay? All right, before we get into this, I just want to, our next segment, I want to engage and and find out, how did that go for you? How did that exercise go? So we have a little bit, we're just going to chat about that. So Ocean, I'm gonna unmute you, and I want to know how it felt and how you feel about your list of values, and what you liked about doing this, and were there any ahas, and do you are there any questions about it? So, gee, I asked a bunch of questions at first, didn't I?
Okay.
So where would you like to start?
I'll start with how it went. So, I mean, it was good. I think it just takes a lot of time and like a lot of thinking because, I mean, I just like really have to think about what's important to me about these areas. And then I really liked going through it because it gives me a sense of meaning and purpose.
Absolutely. So I wonder, as you were speaking about that, I thought, I wonder if I want to give you a suggestion, and we'll see if this helps at all to speed
Mm-hmm.
up that process. I know that you're very kinesthetic, so you are uh, you are a deliberate processor, and it does take time for you. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so one of the ways to, I'm not going to say speed it up per se,
Mm-hmm.
however, it might help you get a little bit more clarity, is to think about what you don't want in a
Mm-hmm.
situation. And then, of course, the opposite of that is what you do want. So if you don't want a long commute somewhere, then the opposite of that might be close to home, within 15 minutes of driving, working
Mm-hmm.
from home 4 days out of the week, right? See how that
Mm-hmm.
works?
Yeah.
I would invite you to see if you can draw on that, what I don't want, and then go to
Yeah.
the opposite part of that and see if it just kind of stirs up a little bit more imagination, creativity, or facilitates accessing that area a little bit
Mm.
easier and quicker for you.
I really like that. Thank you.
Okay. All right, great. And so anything else about values that maybe came up for you? Troubleshooting guts, let's go for it.
Mm, maybe this is like, what are sometimes I think about like values versus preferences, like, well, what's most important to me versus like, oh, well, this is what I would prefer.
That's a great question. I'm going to say they're shades, okay?
Okay.
And so I really see a value as, your core values are non-negotiable. They just
Mm-hmm.
are. Your core values are things like, I need love in my life, and I need integrity from a partner, and honesty. Those are core values. They're not just preferences, right? There is
Mm-hmm.
no negotiation with those at all.
Mm-hmm.
With your basic values, you may find that there are some preferences to them. A value is what's important. A preference is, there might be some room to negotiate the importance of that, or the flexibility around that, or how I can maybe make that work in a different way. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, you're great with coming up with these shades of questions. I really, oh, it's great. It's perfect.
Okay, great.
So, does that help?
Yeah, that does.
Okay, perfect. I'm just taking a sip here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions about values, about your list, or about the language that comes out of the list when you sit down and you look at it and you really look at those values and you think, come on, you want to come up? And you think, wow, if somebody, for instance, a job interview, if somebody
Mm-hmm.
said to me, here's everything that's in the job description, only, oh, you can't work from home 5 days. This is a not working from home gig,
Mm-hmm.
How would you then explain that, how important it is, and that you negotiate maybe a compromise about that? So I'm not asking you specifically to answer
Right.
right now. I'm asking you to take a look at your values and discover how strong a preference is it? How
Mm-hmm.
strong a negotiable item is it? And what is so important about it that you must work from home 1 day a week, 5 days a week, right?
Right.
And to be able then to say to an employer, wow, it is so important to me because of X, Y, and Z that this may be not the right position for you or
Mm-hmm.
for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Based on the fact that this is so important. So does that make sense about how we find the language around that?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, because of course, this is where your language comes from,
Mm-hmm.
how important it truly is. And that's the information that we want to convey to someone. Okay,
Okay.
all right, good. All right, any other questions? Because you are great at coming up with questions.
I think I'm good for now.
Okay, all right, perfect. All right, let's see. All right, sometimes it wants to work a certain way and sometimes not. All right, so we know that the Taylor system is made up of these 6 steps, and it's an acronym. And so this week we're going to work on acknowledgement. Okay, it is what I call the other A in the Taylor system. And acknowledgement. Actually, I love all these parts. I don't know why I think they're so special. I don't know, maybe because they work. And I think they're just really amazing aspects of who we are as humans, right? So, so acknowledgement. I think of as acknowledgement as recognition of the existence of something. Okay, I think that's a pretty good definition of that. All right. Another part of that definition is to show or express appreciation or gratitude for something, fill in the blank, right? The acknowledgement aspect that we're going to work with in this workshop and this training or training, whichever word you like, is the first part of that. Okay, and that's not to say that we don't use acknowledgement to show our appreciation or gratitude. We do. In fact, that's sort of the unspoken part of the spoken part of acknowledgement. So there's 2 parts. There's a spoken part and there's an unspoken part, okay? And we're going to talk about the spoken aspect of acknowledgement. And then, well, the unspoken part is the unspoken part. And that's really that expression of gratitude or appreciation. And I think of it as sort of the, it's kind of the unforgotten part of boundary setting, or really in a lot of communication, we don't really think about it, okay? And so I think it's crucial. I think it's crucial to having this amazing connection with someone and a really good source for communication, because when you acknowledge someone or something, you forge a deeper connection with them. I think of acknowledgement as being seen, as being heard, as being recognized. And we all want that. We may not say it, we all want it. It is a human, I think of it as a human value. For me, it is a core value, personally. When I do not feel heard, recognized, seen, I feel unacknowledged. I feel like somebody, whoever's I'm in conversation or relationship with, doesn't care. And I feel like it's a real personal aspect of human relationships. And so I think it's really another essence of communication and being in relationship. It is, as I say, the other A in the Taylor system, and every bit as important as awareness. They all have their moments of priority and importance, okay? So, as I said, when you acknowledge someone, you create this deeper level of connection and rapport. You forge an immediate sense of deeper connection. And it's powerful. It's very powerful. It's very empowering. And what it does when you do that is that it creates a positive place and aspect from which to have conversation and relationship and communication and find compromise if needed, as opposed to being on the defensive with somebody or putting them on the defensive, okay? I think that when we are setting boundaries, when someone asks us to do something, and our immediate knee-jerk response is yes, and then we go to that triggered place, right? It puts us on the defensive. It's like, ugh, damn it, I didn't want to do that. Now, how do I defend myself? Okay. However, when we go to that immediate place, once we're triggered and we take a pause and we take some breaths and we go to our values, and all this is learned behavior that needs practice. Remember that. We get to go to a much more resourceful place. Okay? So this leads me to the aspects of acknowledgement as I see them fitting into this work, which are that there are two kinds of acknowledgement. There is self-acknowledgement, and that happens when we have been triggered, okay? It happens that we get to be aware, ooh, I'm feeling that feeling. I don't want to do this. I hate it when this happens. This memory comes up. Why didn't they just do what they were supposed to do? I'm feeling triggered, right? And that whole self-talk, that is self-acknowledgement. You are acknowledging what just happened, how you feel, what the situation is, what your perspective is on it, okay? So we're breaking down into chunks and steps this whole triggering response. And it's amazing because when we're triggered, all of this happens in a nanosecond, right? So we have to learn to slow it down and put it into pieces so that we can begin to access these resourceful new skills that we're learning, right? So self-acknowledgement is doing just that. We're saying, okay, I've just been triggered. Now where do I want to go with this? Do I take a deep breath? Do I connect in with my values first? You will go where you're intuitively led to go. And there is no right or wrong. It's just a practice. One thing we want to begin to work on and get good at is then acknowledging your values. Because remember how it all ties in. Once you acknowledge and become aware of your values, you then access that language for setting a boundary if you need to. It doesn't always lead to setting a boundary. I want to emphasize that. Or it might be a shade of a boundary. Remember, we have expectations and we have compromises. So once you self-acknowledge, once you acknowledge what you're feeling, you may then connect in with a value and say, oh, wow, it's so important to me that, you know, we had an agreement, John, that you were going to vacuum when I left for work today. And I came home and it looks like nothing's changed. And one of my values is honoring a promise. So, or honoring a commitment when you say you're going to do something, that you follow through with it. I know that when I make a commitment, it's important that I follow through with it unless we renegotiate it, right? And that's okay. We can renegotiate it. Well, we need to have conversation about that. So it doesn't always lead to that boundary. Well, you know what? It's still a boundary. Even if you don't say it's a boundary, you're coming out and you're saying, this is my value, and that's a boundary, right? You're setting your boundary about that. So self-acknowledgement, connecting to what you feel, what's just been triggered, where you want to go with it from there. Is it language? Is it a feeling? Is it a memory? Is it connecting to your value about something? And then having conversation and discussion about it, okay? It is a starting point, okay? But I want you to know that a starting point might be taking some deep breaths, okay? Just remember that. There's lots of what we call pattern interrupts to interrupt the trigger so that you can think clearly and not be engaged in the negative emotion or the negative response. This is huge. This is so important that that I want you to just remember this about what I'm saying about this, that we interrupt that negative knee-jerk response and we insert something else to do with it, right? We insert a counting or breathing or values. What's my value? You know, say that to yourself so that you can remember it. Okay? I love breathing. It always feels so good. So that's important. Self-awareness, self-acknowledgement, that is a pattern interrupt, okay? And from there, we want to discover, what do you feel and where? You might feel something in your body. You want to check in with it. See if it's a sensation, it's an intuitive moment. What are you sensing? This is all really good awareness, okay? You know, as people pleasers, we have gone through life responding. It's always, yes, sure, I'll do that. Oh, okay. Whatever you say, boss. Oh, okay. I'm not going to say anything that you didn't do that, partner at home. I'm not going to, it's always, I'm just going to gloss over it. Ignoring that we just triggered a feeling, a sensation, a breach of a value and a boundary. And those begin to pile up over time. And then they don't feel well. They don't feel good. They may be a physical sensation. It may lead to anxiety, depression, frustration, anger, resentment. So, yeah, we always want to acknowledge what's going on. And this whole body of work of doing these steps is to slow down this process that we have been unconscious about. It's big, okay? All right. This is big too. So the next part, or that other part of acknowledgement that comes in once we do our self-acknowledgement, is then to acknowledge someone else. And of course, I don't know if I want to acknowledge what's going on for somebody else if I've just been triggered and I'm deep in my anger or frustration. How can I acknowledge them? It doesn't work, right? That's why acknowledging our feelings, that aspect of self-acknowledgement, is so crucial first. It is that first step. It is saying, this is what I feel, and I have a right to my feelings. Okay, I have those feelings. Now, what am I going to do with them? Once we acknowledge them, instead of denying them as we have done in the past, we can do something about them. And we, generally speaking, have then diffused the trigger. I'm not going to tell you it happens 100% of the time. It is, however, a logical transition, okay? When we notice that we're being triggered, damn it, I came home and he didn't vacuum. Oh, I'm so angry and frustrated. Why doesn't he just do this? I feel so triggered about this. Okay, all right. I'm going to acknowledge I'm feeling triggered. I'm going to acknowledge that I feel frustrated. Those are my feelings. Now I can come from a place of resource and say to John or Joan, wow, I got triggered. I walked through the house when I got home today and I got triggered because I noticed that something that we agreed upon when I left this morning didn't happen. And I feel kind of disrespected about that. So before we get into that, I want to find out what happened. I want to acknowledge the situation so that we can talk about it. What happened that something that we agreed upon didn't come to fruition? And you see, those feelings of anger and frustration have at least declined enough, or you've managed them enough to now start a conversation that can be resourceful and not defensive. Because if you come home to somebody and you see that something wasn't done, you're like, damn it, John, why didn't that get done? Or Joan, I saw that you didn't do what we had just agreed about. Wah! Right? All of a sudden it escalates immediately. So this whole language pattern, we have to stop it. We have to find the resource of self-acknowledgement through practice, then we can come back and say, yeah, I bet there's a good reason why this didn't happen. Can we discuss it? And you know what? You may hear from the other party that there were some other priorities that happened, or you may just allow space for that person to say, yeah, man, I forgot. I really just forgot. And that then starts the conversation of, okay, how can we stop that from happening in the future? So you see how this all works together? All right. Because when we allow for the other person to be heard, recognized, seen, then it allows them to come from a place of resource and problem solving rather than being on the defensive. And we have to practice it because can be just such a knee-jerk reaction when we get triggered to respond with our feelings of fill in the blank, right? So we have to really practice this, slow it all down and practice it, okay? And acknowledgement is critical because it is another way of short-circuiting that knee-jerk response. It is a pattern interrupt for that trigger. It's big. It really is big. All right, so I want to have a little bit of a discussion and find out what came up for you during this discussion of acknowledgement. What questions do you have? What situations maybe have come up where you're like, I don't see how that's going to work, okay? So I really want to have a conversation about this. So, Ocean, can we go to you? And I hate to put you on the spot. You're kind of the spot person today, so I want to really thank you. I really want to acknowledge your participation today.
Thanks.
I really want to say I really appreciate your willingness to show up and to interact with me. And so you hear the difference between acknowledging somebody rather than, okay, I'm just going to go to you and put you on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
It feels different. It sounds different. It looks different, right?
Yeah, I thank you for saying that. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So I feel like for acknowledgement, I mean, I like it because just like the example that you did right there, it just creates space for that person. And it just makes their presence known. Like, even though it's like obvious, like, okay, you and I are here, but it's kind of like just speaking it out loud. I have questions about acknowledgement.
Yeah.
So I was wondering what the difference between acknowledgement is with understanding and validating.
So an example would be helpful. And before I go into that, I will say, again, they can be shades. However, I feel like acknowledgement is the starting place.
Mm-hmm.
If we do nothing else, when we start with acknowledgement, it sets the energy for being able to accept and understand.
Mm-hmm. I see.
So, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to give me an example, if you have one, that's great too. We can go with that too.
Mm-hmm. I don't really have an example. I was just like thinking in my head, like,
Yeah, I love
the what?
I love it when you do that. Go right ahead.
No, yeah, I just feel like for me, I'm like understanding and feeling understood is such a big part of my um like relationships. Like I want to understand the other person and I want to be understood. And I feel like a hard thing for me to accept is understanding that I can't understand everyone and not everyone can understand me, depending on the situations. But I feel like I'm just like wondering acknowledgement and differences between like being okay with not being understood and the line between like me validating myself versus me seeking other people's validation.
Ooh, that's a whole
Like
other,
if some,
that's a
yeah,
whole
like if,
conversation. Okay, let's go ahead.
yeah, if something is like some like painful for me, if someone said something that hurt me, it's like, you know, is acknowledgement and validation. I feel like they're different in that scenario because it's like I want them to understand that I was in pain and that like what they said was painful. So it's like I feel like in that moment I'm seeking for all three.
I think that's I think that's fine. I think that I think that they can be synonyms for
Mm-hmm.
one another, and that if being understood is of value for you, because I think that's what this is about. I think that you resonate more with being understood than the word acknowledgement, and that's a value for you. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Am I on track
Mm-hmm.
with that? That acknowledgement kind of is secondary in a way to that. They're all shades of each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the language that you have learned to resonate and create that works for you.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. That was a great question because, uh, yeah, understanding, wanting somebody, wanting somebody, I think there's a fine line between acknowledgement and wanting somebody to get you, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
There, there's acknowledging somebody and saying, I hear what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then when somebody really gets and understands you, it's like empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's, wow, who doesn't want that, right? And then when they
Mm-hmm.
get you, then they get you on such a deeper level that they would go out of their way to do whatever it is that you are requesting. Unfortunately, life doesn't always work that way. So it may be a different level when we just acknowledge, right? Um, Having a deeper level of understanding is what we seek in a partner. That's beautiful. Our partner is not always going to get everything about us, understand everything about us, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the times that we can simply say, I just want to acknowledge that I get what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, and I value and respect it. That's really what acknowledgement is.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
It's a deep conversation. You elicit these deep conversations, and I love them. So thank you for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it helps anybody else who's going to hear this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they may have the same questions as you. Uh, was there? I think there was another part to that, or did we cover it?
I just talked about validation earlier too. I don't know if that's something that you wanted to touch on.
So I think again, validation is another aspect of acknowledgement. Um, it's not necessarily the same thing. I mean, I think they're shades, right? I think acknowledgement says, I just want you to know I hear you, I see you, I recognize what you're saying and what you're feeling. I respect it.
Mm-hmm.
Validation says I'm okay with it.
Mm.
It can say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are fine lines between all of those things. However, if it feels better for you to put your own language of, you really just want to validate that this is what I'm hearing, and just so that I'm clear on that, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It can be used in that context the same way as acknowledgement. I do see acknowledgement a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really that whole essence of saying to somebody, I see who you are, I get you, I respect what you're saying, even if I don't understand it and even if I don't agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're every bit as entitled to what's going on for them as we are for whatever's going on for us. And it just is expressing to them that you recognize that. It's a recognition, right? Validating, we're just picking these words apart, aren't we? Validating can sometimes mean I see it, I get who you are, and I understand it, and it's okay with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to get too hung up on the semantics of this,
Right.
because all of these are synonyms or shades of one another
Yeah.
at different times, given different situations.
Mm-hmm.
What I do want to say, though, is why I like the word acknowledgement is because when you embrace the meaning of that,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes that pattern interrupt at a initial, I'm not going to say a superficial level. It's not quite as deep as the other language
Mm-hmm.
patterns that you brought to the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very surface level, though. It is sort of a surface level place to start, and it's surface level energetically. But it diffuses so much that it gives us a place to go into those deeper realms and deeper feelings of understanding and recognition and
Mm-hmm.
validation. Wow, that was big, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was really good.
Yeah. So, not to get too hung up on that, it just is a level.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a simpler level to start at.
Mm-hmm.
It helps us to detach from the emotion.
Mm.
When we go into a place of understanding or even validation, I believe that we're going into the deeper aspects of understanding and experiencing somebody else's emotion. And that's huge too, right? So acknowledgement is just a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start here without that deeper level of emotion.
Okay.
Some people can't get into the deeper levels of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Was that helpful?
Yeah, super helpful.
I feel like I should have a straw, but you know what? I really like drinking out of a bottle.
Mm-hmm. It's okay.
which I use multiple times. Okay, that was I digress, right? So that's okay. A little lightness after that. That was kind of a deep conversation, so it's okay to.
That's good. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions about how and when to use acknowledgement, what it means for you, about self-acknowledgement, because we haven't really
Hmm.
had a conversation about that. So any questions about self-acknowledgement?
I think I'm okay on like the self-acknowledgement. Like I don't have any questions yet so far. I
So
think,
how do you
mhm.
feel about doing it?
Yeah, I think it's, I don't know. I mean, like maybe it comes a little easier for me because I'm always thinking, and I'm like, I mean, I think it's really helpful for me to always acknowledge like myself. And yeah, I think it's just, I think it's helpful to just take time before like I act or speak.
So it sounds like it comes a little bit more intuitively to you
Mm-hmm.
because you're a kinesthetic. So you're more in touch with, see, there's the language
Mm-hmm.
of hurt, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
more in touch with what you may be feeling,
Mm-hmm.
or more willing to say, oh, what am I feeling? It's more intuitive for you to go there.
Mm-hmm.
So, as somebody who's primarily visual,
Mm-hmm.
I'm usually off and running. I see something and then I gloss over it and I go. And,
Mm-hmm.
and so I want to address this a little bit for people who are visual or auditory or even auditory digital, because it's great. It's great for you. What a great example that you can get in touch with what's going on for you in terms of a feeling, because you're automatically drawn to that.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who is visual will shut that down and move on quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who's auditory might begin to do some self-talk or even play music in their head as a way to get past it when they don't want to deal with it. So I think these are key things to notice if these things are happening. And somebody who is auditory digital, instead of acknowledging what's going on, will try to break it down into a logical step or component and try to fix it from there.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want you to do any of those things. I want you to slow down, like you, Ocean, and say, what am I feeling here? What, because that's what happens for people pleasers. Dismiss it, and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't help them to process it. Okay, so well, hi, welcome. So glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here. We um, we had a wonderful conversation. Why can't I get rid of this? This is so funny. You guys are probably watching me going, what is she doing there? I'll just do that. All right. So welcome, Teresa. How are you doing? You can unmute. I invite you to unmute because I want to engage with you a little bit too. We've been having a wonderful conversation uh, about values and about uh, acknowledgement. That was our topic for this week, was acknowledgement and self-acknowledgement. And so I want to just do a check-in with you about where you are. Thank you so much, Ocean, for all your contribution to this whole topics, these topics for this week. That was really helpful, I think, for a lot of people.
Of course.
So, Teresa, how has this week been for you?
Um,
It's a big,
Overall, okay. So overall, it's been actually rather stressful being pulled in a lot of different directions. I have found out that at the certain age I am, and within COVID, anxiety seems to be a bit of an issue. So, yeah. Okay. So I'm trying to.
whoa, whoa. This is perfect. This is perfect because right before you joined, we were talking about self-acknowledgement and acknowledgement and how visual people, so how kinesthetic go, oh, what am I feeling? I'm kind of in touch. I want to get in touch with what's going on for me. And how visual people go, oh, it's been stressful. Okay, on to the next thing. And you demonstrated that beautifully.
This
Wow.
wasn't planned.
No, it wasn't, but it is perfect. It is perfect. So just going to slow you down a little bit
Okay.
because I want to know, this is so perfect. What are you feeling in addition to the anxiety? So we get the anxiety, there's a lot going on. Tell us a little bit about that.
There's a lot going on. There's hard time focusing on picking out priorities and what to do. I've never been a high energy person, but this level of stress, and I guess because I don't have any stress relief, my stress relief is normally ballroom dancing, and I can't do that right now, right?
Right.
So I don't have a way of getting through all this excess energy. So I'm coming off as a bit hyper lately because I don't have a way of burning out my this extra energy that I have because I'm sort of stressed. I'm having trouble sleeping. I'm not sleeping as much, also because I don't sleep well in the heat. But it's just it's making it a little bit harder to focus. It's making it a little harder to calm down, and it's making it hard for me to just not be. It's making it harder for me to be patient, and my patience is really wearing thin. So I just feel like I need to jump from one thing to the other really quickly in order to keep up with everything, and that's making my task completion a little weaker as well.
Wow, thank you for sharing. So are you willing to play a little bit here?
Sure.
Some people call it the hot seat. I think it's the resource seat, so we're going to go with that. Okay. So first of all, I really want to say thank you for sharing that. I, as somebody who does energy work, I can really feel it, right? I'm wondering, can you take a nice deep breath a few times with us here, if we can all sort of do that together, because what happens when you're stressed is you don't breathe deeply. Can you relate to that?
Yes.
And when we don't breathe deeply and fully embrace where we're at, we are triggered. And triggers show up as, you know, as anxiety, depression, resentment, frustration, unresourceful places. So I want to ask you, now that you've taken a couple of deep breaths, and you may even hear in my language that I've slowed down my language. I actually don't usually speak this slowly. I'm being very deliberate about it. What I'm wondering is, does any of what's going on at work, can this relate to boundaries?
The more I read the book, the more I feel like everything relates to boundaries.
It does. Carry on.
So, oh, and Julie, I haven't addressed this to you, but really quick, it's boundaries in general, but not only people, my not standing up for my own boundaries, but I also sometimes step on other people's boundaries. I've been noticing that too a lot, and I need to stop it. But I've noticed that.
Take a deep breath. That was good self-awareness, really good. And I want to acknowledge that. This whole concept of acknowledgement that we're talking about here is because it really helps you to come from a place of resource. If we don't acknowledge what's going on, how can we respond from a place of resourcefulness? We cannot. And yes, I'm going to go out. I'm not even, I don't see it as going out on a limb. I see it as accurate in my many years of doing this work. What I noticed was that I would say 90% of the time when we ignore this stuff in our lives, when we ignore our boundaries, when we ignore our values, we, again, project it out on somebody else, all the negative emotions that we have just created for ourselves.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this is the what's the word I'm looking for? The need, the deep, deep need for self-acknowledgement. Because when you skip over that step, you're skipping over yourself. You're discounting yourself. You're devaluing yourself. Forget about setting the boundary for a moment. I want you to step up and say, what's going on here? I need to have some self-acknowledgement about where I'm at, my feelings, and then I can step in to a more resourceful place that isn't emotionally triggered. And I can see where I'm stepping over somebody else because I'm not setting my boundaries. Woo-hoo! I mean, that's huge, 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 huge. I am so glad you came to this call today. Are you?
Yes, I am. I didn't expect this, but hey, why not?
It's big. Oh, listen, I trust the universe always brings what needs to happen on the call. Okay. So now the question is, where do we go with it, right? Because you're visual, you're like, oh, gotta move on, gotta move on, gotta move on. Where do we go with this? And we were just having that conversation. You'll go back and listen to it. And oh, by the way, I did not send last week's call. You'll get them at the same time. I just did it up here. Okay.
Thank you, Julie.
And I have a lot going on too. So here's the big question about this. Now you get to go to, how do I set a boundary? Right? So I want to hear, if you're willing, a little bit about what's going on that triggered you so that we can get in touch with your values about it and give you some language.
Okay. I'm going to use a work example. Now, I'm fairly new to the team that I'm on, right? And I happen to be working with probably the most experienced engineering manager that I've ever been allowed to support. Normally, somebody this senior is given to the more senior project managers, but they gave him to me, and I have a lot of respect for this man. So we were putting together the project plan, which they've never done before. So I went through all their documents, and I tried to help them by pulling together from all their documents that they had written into this one pager, all the requirements that they needed to do. I get into a meeting with the engineering manager, and he says, this is not what I want. This doesn't work. There's big holes in your knowledge in what you're trying to do, and you're not capturing the whole picture. And then he redid it completely his way. And pretty much him and his lead that I had been working with were completely like, what's going on? We didn't expect it. So it was frustrating. That was my first reaction. And it was actually sort of embarrassing. I've been doing this job for 10 years. It's not like I don't know what I'm doing. I was trying to help them getting going because this is a new process. So the good part about this was that in my one-on-one with this man, it was a half an hour one-on-one. And I said to him, I said, it's the first time we're working together. I think we need to work through it. So I spent an hour and a half with him. And Julie, if it wasn't for your boundary issues, if it wasn't for these classes, if it wasn't for me thinking, I don't know if I would have had the courage to actually say that to him. But it's really like, okay, so obviously I've stepped on his boundaries because what I was doing wasn't good enough for him. So we had a disconnect there. So by being able to discuss, it's like, well, here's what I need. What do you need from a project plan? And then we spent the next hour and a half on that, and it was wonderful. But it was still, it wasn't, what triggered it is the situation was frustrating and embarrassing at first because I'd been working with his guys to do what I'm doing with the other 5 teams I support. And for this team, it didn't work. And I'm not used to having an engineering manager being so cold to come in and say, none of that's working for me. You didn't capture everything you're doing. This is wrong. So, yeah.
Yeah, that sucks. I'm just going to say that. That's kind of clueless about communication and about being a leader, right?
Yep.
Okay. Now, and I could go on about that, and I'm not. So here's what I'm going to say about it. First of all, big picture. When you learn these tools and learn this language, you get to educate somebody else in how to do it. And it happens inadvertently. It is just cause and effect. And it's amazing, okay? I'm not saying it happens overnight. It doesn't. However, it does happen because once you're triggered, and I don't know if you did this, so I'm mind reading here, okay? I'm just going to assume, because this goes back to acknowledgement. We acknowledge our feelings. I'm feeling embarrassed and frustrated. I feel like I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough to be on this team, right? And how can I be on this team when I don't measure up? Am I there? Bingo, right?
Yep, right on.
And so we can't always go in back to the person in an immediately in the situation that we're in and say, look, you're triggering me, or this is what came up for me. I don't know. We suggest using the word trigger, and you can, you depending upon who it is. So I want to give you something that might be of more value for you, which is to go back to him at a later date and say, I just want to have a little bit of a conversation about that situation. It's just a debrief. We don't even have to have a conversation per se. I want to share with you what came up for me and how it came across, and I hope you're willing to hear it. I would imagine, and this is language that you can use, so go back and listen to this and use it. I would imagine as a leader, I just imagine that you would be willing to hear this. He's not going to go, well, yeah, as a leader, I don't want to hear it, right?
No.
I mean, who would do that?
No, he's not that type.
I don't think anybody would do that. They might say, yeah, this isn't a great time. And you could say, oh, yeah, no, I would like us to schedule a time to do that. I really appreciate your being willing to have just a little bit of a conversation about this. Because when you're triggered, you're in those negative emotions and you cannot go back and have a resourceful conversation. It kind of just doesn't, they're like, you know how magnets push each other when you're at those, you can't do it, okay? However, when you've done that self-acknowledgement and that debrief of yourself about where you're at and how it feels and what came up for you about feeling devalued, you can go back then and have that conversation. And here's where I would start. The very first thing I heard you say to me was, I have so much respect for him. So I want you to pay attention to your values, which I know is going to be respect. It has to be. That if it isn't on your list of values, I'd be shocked. And if it isn't top, I'd be shocked. Because I've heard it a couple of times, okay? This is the importance of listening to your own language and what you say. Because it's not just respect for the people that you work with, it's their respect for you. Goes both ways, right? Mm-hmm. So you could go to him and say, you know, I have so much respect for you, and I just want to share what sort of showed up for me when I submitted this to you and you came back and said it was basically worthless, or whatever his words were. You may want to make sure you use his words.
Okay.
I immediately felt triggered and went to a place of feeling worthless, that I wasn't valuable to this team. And I know that's not true. Because you do know that that's not true. It's just you're in a learning curve right now with him.
Big learning curve, yeah.
And you can say that. We're in a learning curve and we're going to have to work through this. So I just want to have that conversation, a little bit of that conversation, and say, this is what came up for me. I'm sure you didn't mean, it wasn't your intention to convey that. I'm sure it was just a matter of being in a matter-of-fact place. And I work best from a little bit more information. Not just, this doesn't work for me. He has to start learning how to communicate, and you have to set the boundary of telling him that.
Okay.
And so you don't want to say to him, you have to do this. You want to say, I work best from, I respond best to, I can hear you best when. Yeah. And I can do my best work from those perspectives.
Julie, has anybody ever considered those kind of phrases confrontational? I say I don't like confrontation, so I always think twice before I use phrases. I mean, because that's direct, and I'm fine with direct. I just don't want conflict because of it.
Well, here's the difference. So it's a great question. The difference is when you say I respond best. You're coming from an I statement, not you said that and I felt like this. You could even say that because it's a fact, right? You could probably even say, when you said that, I felt this. Confrontational is, you have no right to talk to me like that. Confrontational is, you said, you did, and it's all your fault. Okay? When you take ownership for how you're feeling, that nobody can argue with them. They're your feelings. You're not accusing him of anything that he didn't do. You want to be careful of that. You want to say, this is what I recall that you said to me. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
About right? You want to say that to him. This is what I recall you said to me. Does that sound about right?
That last part makes it smoother.
Yeah. Does that sound about right? Yeah. And so what happened for me is I went into this place of, and I felt very fill in the blank. And it didn't feel good. And I'm sure that wasn't your intention. I know you would never intentionally do that. That is such a key phrase. Because who would intentionally do that? What a jerk. Only a jerk would intentionally do that. Here's another key phrase for you. And this is bold. I'm going to give it to you. You may not be aware that this is happening, or you may not be aware that this happened. You may not be aware of. Be careful where you use that, right? Because you're assuming that somebody isn't aware, and you want to be careful of that, right? So I'm just going to say be careful where you use that. It gets a little bit more in depth in situations. It's my big caveat with that phrase. How does that feel so far?
That feels good because it's the ability to be honest, but the little things that you have at the end are like, were you aware of that, or is that how you recall it? You know, or is that how you remember it? Those things like that kind of that gives them the chance to say, oh no, that's not how I recall it, because sometimes you misinterpret what people say, or you could say, this is what I meant by that, and you're like, oh, okay, because I took it another way. And then have that, yeah, I'm getting you.
Perfect, exactly. And that's that whole thing of expectations and mind reading, and be careful of your own perspectives and perceptions and projections.
Yes, and there's also a little bit of acknowledgement going on there. It's like, you know, this is how I felt, but I'm going to acknowledge you, like to give you a chance to say, you know, hey, this is how you felt, or hey, this is what you meant, or, you know, whatever.
Exactly. Perfect.
Yeah, I was reading acknowledgement last night, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a good one.
And we had a great, and when you get the recording of this, really go back and listen to the beginning of it, because we had a great interaction, Ocean and I did, about kind of shades of acknowledgement, and it's a great conversation. So I love when people ask questions. It just gives you a more depth, right? So I want to say that unfortunately we're almost out of time, because I could go on about this forever, right? Oh wait, I wrote a book. So, so I do want to just ask you, is there anything else that feels like it's burning that you need to have some guidance on before we close? Either of you. You're on, Teresa, so let's start with you.
This may be too long of a subject, but I really like to talk a little bit more about the fact of how not to step on other people's boundaries. Because the more I read on boundaries, the more I realize I am not respecting my own boundaries, but I'm not respecting other people's boundaries. And some of the things that come out of my mouth, because I'm so stressed out lately, need to stop coming out of my mouth. I need to respect other people's boundaries, you know, especially at work. Sometimes I say things that are a little too personal, and it just happens. And I just my filter is going away, and I don't know if it's because I'm locked in the house because of COVID or what, but my filter seems to be diminishing, and my political correctness feature, because I'm not face to face with the person, is diminishing, sadly.
Right. So that's a great question. So two parts to that. That's your knee-jerk response, and you have to work on a pattern interrupt. Acknowledgement is a pattern interrupt. So go back and listen to this week's recording. You'll hear how it's a pattern interrupt. And there are other ones. Taking a deep breath, counting is famously a pattern interrupt. You have to stop the knee-jerk response. Period. That's what happens. You're triggered, and it happens, and it happens when things build up. And we're human, and it's going to continue to happen until we find a better interruption for it. Okay? So cut yourself a little slack there. It's not going to change overnight. It is, in terms of you stepping on another person's boundaries, it is cause and effect. When you are stepped on, when your boundary is stepped on, you will in turn project and act it out on somebody else. It is just cause and effect. And so that's why a pattern interrupt is so important. You have to stop the trigger. You have to acknowledge the trigger. You have to be aware of the trigger. You have to deal with the trigger. And when you practice that, and you have to practice it, then the trigger becomes less of a trigger until eventually the trigger goes away, and we reach a critical mass where your new knee-jerk reaction is to go something like this. Wow. Hmm. Huh. Wow, I can't believe. And this is internal, okay? This is internal. Wow, I can't believe he just said that. And you're being silent outwardly, but you're processing inwardly where you go, right? Your head explodes. You're like, what the fuck just happened? I can't believe he just did that. That's that whole self-acknowledgement. Then you get to calm yourself down and go, wow, I'm going to acknowledge him. Dude, I don't know what his first name is. John, we'll use John. Oh, John, I get where you're coming from. I think we need to have a deeper conversation about this when it's more opportune and we can go into a more resourceful place for both of us. There's your boundary.
Okay.
That is a boundary. That is the boundary. When will it be good? When can we schedule? I know this is important to you. I really respect that you want to use your language for that, your value. I know that this is important to you. Let's schedule this so that we can have a deeper conversation about how to get this done in a way that works for both of us.
Okay.
Breathe. Right? We're triggered and then we stop breathing. So is that a little bit, did that help?
Yes. Yes, it did.
All right, I just want to check in with Ocean before we close. We're going to run just a couple of minutes over because I want to get to homework, which is pretty quick, and we're a couple of minutes over. So, but it was good stuff. So hang on. Okay, Ocean, if you can just let me know if there's anything that you want to go over or not, then we'll move right to homework. Okay, you can unmute.
I think something that's been on my mind is the difference between being empathic and being enmeshed with other people.
Oh,
I don't know if that's like this week we could talk about that or like another time.
It might be I'm going to give you a quick response to that, and then I think that'll be a great topic for next week as we talk about the R and the O. I think it's perfectly
okay.
O and the R. Okay.
Great.
The quick response to that is an empath might feel the emotions and then stop.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sensing this, I'm feeling this, now I need to do something with it. That's resourceful. Enmeshed is trying to fix it in an unresourceful way, or better yet, let me phrase it a little bit differently, is trying to fix the other person.
Yeah.
Not just resolve in a collaborative way the situation.
Yeah.
It is in an attempt to fix the other person because you don't like the feeling that you're feeling.
Right.
And that goes to response and to the O and the R, which is outcome and response.
Okay.
All right. Great question. Great question. And please remind me next week.
Oh, I will for sure.
Because I think it's a great example of.
Okay.
All right. So the homework is really to just keep doing what you're doing and to keep going over those patterns and noticing and practicing. That's the homework.
Right. Okay.
All right. Well done.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Great. Enjoy your week.
Me
And
too.
there will be an email with the links to both of these sessions. And I look forward to next week or communicating in Facebook if that happens.
Okay. Thank you so much, Julie.
You're so welcome. Be well.